on, I got a life here. All right. We're ready to start here. Are we going?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and call the February 15th, 2023 meeting of the Los Osos Groundwater Basin Management Committee Board of Directors to order. Before we take a roll call vote, I would like to bring something to the attention of the other three members that are here in person, or the other two members, pardon me, that are here in person. We have one of our members is unable to make it in person because she is very sick today. So under AB 2449 that was passed by the legislature last year, we're able to do hybrid meetings, and if the person has a severe situation or an emergency situation, we're able to allow that person to participate by internet. And in this particular case, we have that finding because she's ill. So is there any objection to the three board members that are here to her participating remotely?
No objection.
No objection.
Okay, she can participate remotely. Are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Chair Hilsky.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope you feel better.
Thank you.
All right, so we can have roll call now.
Director Reinecke,
Here.
Director Gibson. Here. Director Zimmer,
Here.
Chair Hilsky.
Present.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Mark, would you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mark. Sure. Do we have any board member comments? You may make a brief comment.
I have one brief comment. I just wanted to talk about a program that Golden State has right now, the Flume program. I know we've talked about it in this quorum, but recently we've done a direct install program and really increased our outreach effort towards the community. And today we have about 100 installs, which is significant progress as a result of that program. So, you know, those that aren't familiar with the Flume, it's a way that you can get real-time access to your water usage. The information's on our webpage. And so if you would like to participate in that program or find out more about it, the best place to start is on the webpage, and then you can contact us and we'll help you through the process. So ongoing, but it's a good way to monitor your water usage, and pretty successful program to date.
Yeah, I have one, but I'm in the CSD's district.
Yeah.
Very, very successful.
Right.
Okay, any other brief comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the consent agenda. Or special presentation, we have none, so we'll go to the consent agenda. There's three items on the consent agenda: the 2022 budget update and invoice register, the 2023 budget update and invoice register, and the approval of the minutes from November 16th, 2022 BMC meeting. Does anybody want to pull one of these items? Okay, we'll consider them as a group. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I have a question about it, or more of a comment, just how to improve what I think would be an improvement on our registry and budget. And I think we talked about this last time when we reallocate funds. We note that these funds have been moved to a different project, and then also just looking through it, if we look at our budget and have a plan of when we are expecting to expense this budget, I think it'll help us. It'll help us work through the budget and ensure we complete the projects that we have listed, but it'll also give us some timing to prepare and plan if other things come up early on in the year. So what I'm reflecting back on is a couple of projects we did last year. It seemed like we got caught at the end of the year, trying to make adjustments on that budget. So I think if we had a timeline of when we projected to do it, I know things like the annual report and the monitoring, those are scheduled events. So we have that. But some of these other ones, one that really came to mind was like the Los Osos Creek gauge. If we don't get water in the springtime, chances are we may not get it in the fall. We might want to allocate that money earlier. And then things like the other really big item was the our well monitoring well funding. If we get caught in an environmental or something happens that delays that till the following year, I'd like to start talking about that earlier than later. So two recommendations there.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, good comments, Director Zimmer, and yeah, something that we talked about previously, and so we will try to incorporate it into the calendar year 2023 budget as we make decisions. And I like the thought, especially with respect to the stream gauge rating curve with our Mediterranean climate. Unfortunately, once we hit the end of the wet season, it's unlikely we're going to see rain for a number of months, and maybe potentially early in the fall or winter of the next year. But makes sense. And I think that would alleviate some of the challenges, we saw in 2022. We wanted to leverage unused funds to get initiatives done, but it put it under a significant time crunch.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other? Okay, let's go to public comment. Anybody in the room want to comment?
And if you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand. I do have one online. Would you like me to start, or is there anybody in the boardroom?
No, there's nobody in the boardroom.
All right, Lynette, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Lynette Tornotsky, and I live in Los Osos, and I'm very happy to say that the CSD offered flume as well, which I have on my house, and I find it to be very effective. My question is, are flumes allowed to be put on recycled water? I'm speaking not officially, but on behalf of Celebrate Los Osos. We maintain the median, which is watered by recycled water. Drivers that aren't very careful have run over the controller boxes to the water. The water has cascaded down the street, and we have to pay hundreds of dollars for that water that is lost. So I'm wondering if getting a flume on recycled water is even possible. Thank you.
There's no further public comment online.
Okay, so do you want to respond to that, Mark?
Yes, we can put a flume device on that meter. It's the same meter as a potable water meter, so should work fine from what I understand. So as long as it works and does the job we need it to do, there's no reason on Golden State's side why we couldn't put a flume device on that meter also.
The only limitation is you have to have a place for the
Oh.
broadcast unit. So
The Wi-Fi,
The
correct.
Wi-Fi, right.
Okay, yeah. So that may be the challenge, is that you have to have a Wi-Fi to connect to. I don't know if we could, maybe one of the businesses there might offer their Wi-Fi that's right across the street right there. Maybe an option to look at there. Otherwise, the internet, that's right. The Wi-Fi is going to be the challenge.
Thank you for that clarification, Ron. Okay, so do we have any other comments? If not, can we have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, it's moved in second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Hi.
I was just going to ask if you're still with us, but thank you for.
I hope she's not that sick.
Okay, so number 7, public comment for items not appearing on the agenda. Does anybody in the room want to make a public comment? Yes. If you would step up to the podium, please. We're having microphone issues.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Becky McFarland, Los Osos. My comment is on the maps that are in the annual reports that show seawater intrusion. I've put things together to teach people in the neighborhood about it, but the years, the color for the years changes. So one year, 2007 might be red, and then the next year, 2007 is now shown as green. And so it makes it kind of confusing. So just a simple ask, can those be all, in conformity with each other? Because it doesn't make it easy to read. That, and I'm still concerned with this 40 gallons per person number that's being used. I went back and looked in the basin reports, as I've been instructed to do, is go read those reports. And that same number was being used back in like 2016. So, and that's just for indoor use. And I know there is a way to check that through sewage that goes through, but shouldn't we be looking at the total use by people? Because I mean, that all comes from our aquifer, whether it's inside or out. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any public comment online?
Yes, there is. And if there's anybody else that wants to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards. And we often talk about climate change. And most recently with the rainfall, we've seen that being one of the hallmarks of climate change. And the flip side of that coin, of course, is extended periods of drought. So the question becomes, how do we best manage these big rainfall events that are characterized by a series of atmospheric rivers? And so I wanted to offer, and I've suggested before, that we consider a bladder dam on the south side of the bridge at Los Osos Creek and Los Osos Valley Road to slow flows during these big rainfall events. And this could enhance groundwater basin recharge. Why is this location strategic? Well, we know that the lower aquifer, zones D and E, daylight or surface at the creek bottom, about a half a mile south of Los Osos Valley Road in the creek bed. So the basin sweeps up and daylight's in the creek. So this would be one way to mimic nature and better recharge the lower basin during these peak rainfall events. This is something we've been unable to do so far at Broderson. So I believe one key piece of basin management is our ability to recharge the basin either naturally or otherwise. So I'd like to see that put on an agenda for discussion or listed as an initiative during the strategic planning sessions. I think it's something that we can do at very low cost in one location. Again, just north or south of the bridge and Los Osos Valley Road at the creek. We can do this. It's not only a stormwater capture location, but it produces a natural recharge. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other comments online?
Yep, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all actually for doing the very best you can in protecting our water basin. But unfortunately, the best you can is not going to save our basin or create a sustainable basin for us. We have spent now over 7 years with the management committee here. We still have seawater intrusion coming in. Our water levels are increasing only a little slightly, and we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on trying to manage our basin at this point. We still have 50% or thereabouts of our extracted water unmetered. So all the estimations that we're doing just don't seem to be working at all. We haven't really taken into consideration truly what climate change really means. And I'd like to read a paragraph from an article that is actually a letter to the editor in the Carmel Pinecone from the Monterey Peninsula, which is suffering water shortages just like we are here. And this is from a group. It's the Monterey County Citizens Climate Lobby, which has actually meteorologists that are involved in it that have been studying climate change and the situation in California for the last couple decades. And what they're saying is that modeling studies involving many different and highly credible climate models reveal the long-term climate future for California. More of the same, except amplified. This is worsening drought through at least the end of the century, punctuated by occasional severe storms and flooding events of growing strength and intensity, with most of the resulting rainfall simply finding its way back to the sea. Despite the heavy rains we've experienced in January, California remains in a drought crisis that will only grow worse by the decades. We have not come up with a plan to save our basin. We are now looking at Plan B, which is bringing in outside water. And the reason we have Plan B is because Plan A is not working, or it hasn't been implemented to the extent that it should be. So I really ask you to start looking at what we have in our future here, where we've been for the last 7 years, and let's start changing our metrics and our assumptions on how much water we're getting through precipitation, through stream flow, and that gets back into our aquifer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Oops, is there anything, anybody else, Laura?
There's no further comment on.
Okay, with that, then we'll go ahead and close public comment for items not appearing on the agenda. And then we'll move on to item number 8, the executive director's report. Daniel.
Thank you, Chair Ohilski. Happy to provide the executive director's report to you. I know it's been a number of months since we've had a BMC meeting, but I'm happy to report that BMC staff and as well as party staff from the BMC parties have been making good progress on a number of initiatives, which I will describe in the executive director's report. We'll start with funding and financing. There's an update on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant, and unfortunately, Los Osos Basin's ineligibility for that grant. But as always, the BMC party staff and BMC staff will be continuing to evaluate funding and financing opportunities for future planning and or implementation projects for the Los Osos Basin. Moving on to the initiatives, some exciting news that we received in December of 2022 was that the BMC was notified that the Los Osos Basin would be included in the Department of Water Resources upcoming statewide aerial electromagnetic survey, currently scheduled for April of 2023. So this is a survey that the Department of Water Resources has been performing statewide, primarily focused on medium, high, and critically overdraft Sigma basins, but has agreed to, in certain areas where adjudicated or very low or low priority basins are in close proximity to these higher priority Sigma basins, to extend the survey into areas of interest within those adjacent or nearby basins. And that I think this has been in large part due to the support that the state and federal regulatory agencies as well as local stakeholders have expressed for DWR to expand their survey. And And so we're happy to be included in that survey, and we think that that is going to provide some really good information, new information that we don't have on the hydrogeology, as well as potentially the seawater intrusion extents in different portions of the basin. So what BMC staff has done is provided DWR with area of interest maps, as well as lithologic and other hydrogeologic information to help inform their flight paths for their survey. And we've included those materials in as attachments to the executive director's report. And just, to maybe help better explain what an AAM survey looks like, it is it's almost like something out of a Roadrunner cartoon. You basically have a helicopter that suspends a very large electromagnet that then flies around in close proximity, about 200 feet off the ground. And by doing this, they're able to send electromagnetic waves down into the groundwater basin and read the response as those waves bounce back to the electromagnetic receiver, and then they can interpolate that into what types of materials are existing in the groundwater basin at that area. Is it gravels? Is it clays? Is it sandy loams? Based on the resistivity to those waves. The other helpful piece of this is also through those interpretations. In certain areas, they can determine whether or not the water in those portions of the basins is fresh or salt water, and thus can help better map seawater intrusion. So look forward to that happening in April, and we'll bring more information as we get it from DWR back to the BMC. Other exciting news is that the Los Osos CSD received its agreement with the State Water Resources Control Board for the water recycling funding study. We, as has been talked about at the BMC, we've been waiting for a number of months to get that formal confirmation that the CSD will receive that grant funding. That grant funding is a critical piece of the funding portfolio for the development of a transient model and evaluation of additional recycled water and supplemental supply opportunities to improve the sustainability of the Los Osos Basin. So as was mentioned in public comment earlier about enhancing recharge in Los Osos Creek, that's the type of thing that we can analyze with this study and with the new transient model to help better inform the BMC on opportunities to increase the sustainable yield. So an RFP has been prepared and approved by the BMC and the LOCSD boards. It's being updated right now based on the latest terms of the grant agreement and should be released shortly to procure those services to perform that study. Another initiative in progress, the Cleeth Harris Geologist has completed the development of a Los Osos Basin well database. This was an initiative that the BMC funded in the latter parts of 2022. That database is currently undergoing staff review and will be provided to the BMC at a future meeting. And then another initiative that was completed at the very end of 2022 was the modifications to the Farrell well, or LA13, to improve the BMC's ability to better monitor seawater intrusion in Zone D. The LOCSD contracted with Filiponi and Thompson to complete those modifications. Those modifications were completed in December, and the detailed information on what was performed is included in the well completion report as an attachment to this executive director's report. That well, which was previously an abandoned production well, zoned in multiple aquifers, now is a dedicated Zone E monitoring well and will be incorporated into the BMC's monitoring program, and results included in future annual monitoring reports. The Program C adaptive management, the BMC had requested that Cleeth Harris geologists evaluate the anticipated increases in sustainable yield that the second and third program C wells would provide utilizing the new criteria for calculating the sustainable yield. That analysis has been complete, is currently undergoing staff review and will be brought to the BMC at a future meeting. There are a number of other there are updates provided for county planning for land use related items. And then also we have the updated Los Osos Wharf wastewater and recycled water flow table. I will point out that there's a typo in the January 2022 influent data point. That should be 45 acre feet. We'll get that fixed in the next iteration of the executive director's report. And then just some quick updates on the status of basin plan infrastructure projects. The 8th Street Upper Aquifer well is fully operational. An exciting milestone. That was a grant funded project from the county IRWM program that the CSD initiated. Will allow the CSD to shift pumping from the lower aquifer to the upper aquifer and improve sustainable yield. And then also the CSD is continuing to progress its second program C well. The well itself is constructed and now is the CSD is undergoing the process of designing, well, no, I guess the design of the transmission main is complete. The well equipping is in the design phase, and then the completion of all phases is estimated to occur in June 2024. And that concludes my executive director's report.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions, please?
Yeah, quick one to the CSD, or maybe Ron or Dan or Marshall. The capacity of that well that was constructed, the program C, the new program C well.
Ron, that's probably a question for you.
Right. It'll produce about 200 acre feet a year. You'll see in the upcoming tech memo from Cleith Harris regarding what portion of that will be sustainable yield. It's not as high as we thought because of the changes we made in stopping seawater intrusion where it's at, meaning decreased pumping from like our 8th Street lower aquifer
You're
well.
gonna have to shift some.
Yeah, it'll be shifting pumping, so it's not as high as it was anticipated. So that the sustainable yield won't be as high, but the production from the well will be about 200 acre feet a year.
And there had been considered other sites out in the general area there that were not pursued for one reason or another. Is this thought to be consistent with what some of those other sites might have been able to produce?
Yes, production wise, yes.
Okay.
But I believe when you
Impact-wise.
see the technical memo, the closer you move towards the creek compartment, will get higher yields. From
Higher safe yield.
Safe
increase-
yields,
safe
safe
yield,
yields,
safe
not
yield
higher
increases.
production.
Okay. Okay. And when do you think the analysis of what effect that has on the safe yield will be ready?
Um,
We should have that available at our next BMC meeting.
Cool.
Any other
Just to
questions? Yeah, Mark.
Kind of follow along that. So that third program C well, is that going to be included in the analysis or so Cleith is looking at both of them, the one that you completed, because he already did that analysis, right? Before you drilled it, and now there was a couple changes. And so is he going to update that in this report? Okay, good.
Ron, could you verbally answer so the
Yes.
people online could?
I'm shaking my head. Yes, no. Yeah. Again, it's because of how we changed the assumptions in the model.
Yeah.
It adjusted the safe yield number from the number 2 well.
Okay, good. Well, that's great news. And then along that with the CSD and the grant funding for the model. Thank you for this district for handling that and getting that grant. Did have a question about the timing of that. What is the next steps for us as the Basin Management Committee, right? So we have a peer review in our budget for that modeling, but is there any other, I guess, how do we put the pieces together? Because I think the county was going to come in with some funding to match this grant. I don't have the puzzle all connected in my mind as you were explaining it. So maybe we bring that back at the next, if you don't want to go into detail too much about it. But was kind of thinking along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that now. I mean, it is let's call it a diverse portfolio of funding that we're combining to it really allow us to get the inertial energy to create the transient model due to the kind of extensive level of effort that's required. So the two primary sources of funding are the $200,000 in grant funding that the CSD, has received on behalf of the BMC from the Water Recycling Funding Program.
Mhm.
The second largest component is the $150,000 in funding that the county is going to be making available through a cost share agreement with the CSD. And then the final piece of that puzzle is the matching fund contributions that the BMC is going to provide through the peer review and then the well database. So one's an initiative still to be funded, and the other one is an initiative that the BMC had already undertaken but is a critical piece for being able to develop the transient model. So.
And if I could just add, Dan, since it's taken so long to get the grant approval, we do need to revise, the RFP is going to go out when that deadline is, and then how that timeline will progress out. But it's about 2 years.
Okay.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Got a couple other, just took a
Go
really
ahead.
hard look at the executive director report as the beginning of the year. So there was a couple things that I had questions on and just wanted to make sure, is it a good time to kind of clean some of this up or not? I know we talked about it before, and I think you leave a lot of this on just to document the history, which is good. But you started with the Sigma implementation grant, and I mean, if that's just not even an option for us to consider, maybe it's time to take it off. If we don't need that on there, was kind of a question to see if you think that's viable. Another one was the earworm. Is there opportunities? I mean, should we leave that on there? Is there future opportunities for some grant funding there? To keep talking about that. Let's see, we talked about the WRFP and the basin well database. Oh, the well completion report. You mentioned that future monitoring reports, is that going to be in 2023 then when we do or is that too soon to expect that to be in there?
I would anticipate that that's too soon. We did the well modifications in December. I would suspect it'll be included in the spring 2023 monitoring program, but it wouldn't show up in the, we can have results available to the BMC, but I wouldn't anticipate it showing up in the 2022 annual report.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And then just, that's the, one of the things was the Farrell well reconstruction, right? And the, that when I looked at the report, it looked like it was a brand new well. The construction report I looked at, it didn't really list the history of that well, that well was a former production well. It had a liner in it. Now we put another liner in it. You got gravel pack. And I mean, what just popped in my mind is, are we creating another Rosina well? Getting some leakage in some compartment from another one, and just making sure I didn't see any of that in the report. I guess one of my questions is this the final report, and are the outcome conclusive that it was able to be completed in the way that we intended it to only represent the lower portion?
Yeah, so as I understand it, this is the final well completion report, and presumably it's filled out the way it is, just given that that's the way the form is developed. But yeah, I'm sure that it would be great to maybe add some additional history and documentation so that somebody in the future might be able to interpret results that they're seeing from that well. As far as I know, the well retrofits were completed successfully. I think probably until we start pulling water quality data, we may or may not we'll see whether or not we're observing nitrates, which we wouldn't anticipate seeing in the lower lower aquifer, the zone
Yeah.
E. And so, yeah, I don't know, Ron, unless there were any other water quality results that were collected as part of the construction. I have not seen those.
Yeah.
I was out there quite a few of the days that they are working, and Cleith Harris had an on-site monitor, working through the whole drilling. And it was my understanding, again, as Dan indicated, that it was successful and that we should have a good seal down there at the bottom.
Okay, good.
But we can double check with Cleith Harris on that.
The last part of the question I had on my list here was the recycle water connection for the schools. We were involved in that and talking about it. It kind of, I'm not sure where we left off, but just one of the things in 2023. I know Golden State's been in some of those conversations. Want to make sure I help facilitate that along. And so I don't know if we have an update or if we can do that in future discussions.
Yeah, that would be a good initiative to add. So yeah, one of the things that we're talking about with county staff is, because the Los Osos water recycling facility is such a critical, piece of water infrastructure here in Los Osos, is kind of providing a venue to get more updated information on projects and initiatives that the county is working on for that facility to the BMC. And so, yeah, the recycled water connections for the schools is obviously a critical one that'll allow us to reduce our lower aquifer pumping. And so, yeah, we'll be working to bring updates on that. I think I'm happy to report that is progressing. I think, as we've mentioned, the county has gotten grant funds, and as I understand it, they're progressing through the design of those connections. And so we can look to bring forth more information here shortly.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, thank you. So let's go to public comment on, anybody in the room have a public comment? Oh, yes, would you step up to the podium, please? And state your name for the record.
Becky McFarland again. Thank you, Daniel, for saying some more about updating planning and building on the water situation. I'd be interested if there's more that was discussed, because as we have seen, and maybe you don't know, the county continues to issue building permits for new building, despite letters from the Coastal Commission telling them to stop due to the lack of proof of a sustainable water supply for the existing population here. And that's even with Title 19 program retrofits. And are they fully aware of the rising nitrate levels in the S&T wells, and how that's only a portion of our aquifer? But if they're not able to use some of that, I mean, that's part of our whole aquifer, that there's rising nitrates and chlorides there. Anyway, thank you for that. Oh, one last thing, I'm looking at the fall draft metrics, and it does show, it looks like a slight increase in chlorides in the lower aquifer. And so I'm hoping that also is passed on to the county, and they're very aware of what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. There's nobody else in the room that would like to speak. So Laura, anybody online?
Yes, and if you are online and you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I have a number of concerns about BMC staff priorities. And I think we need to be more selective about the grants we pursue. And because it appears that BMC staff is spending an inordinate amount of time on grant pursuits that we're likely never to get. Most of the grants don't fit for Los Osos, aren't a good fit for Los Osos. And our basin plan projects are, for the most part, paid for. So we don't need any of these grants except a handful of ones that help maybe with monitoring and so forth. Yeah, the earworm grant and the Prop 1 grant, these, we just don't need these. So my point is, I'd ask your committee to direct staff again to be more selective and certainly not pursue projects just because they are more eligible for grants, that's not a reason to do that, in my view. I'm also a little disappointed on this transient model of funding that the county has provided 150 grand, and they've made the Los Osos CSD and Basin Management Committee staff do all the work to get this grant. I've suggested a year ago that the county should fund the entire thing, that it's an integral part of ever having the Coastal Commission consider the community plan in a true context. So I think the county's really dropped the ball, and I think they need to step up and bridge whatever other funding needs to happen. The Basin Well database has been completed by Cleith Harris. Why it hasn't been released, I mean, the ED report says that it's still under review. We don't need, the public doesn't need a presentation. That's not required. Post the data on your website. Let us look at it. Make the presentation when you can. I don't know why it's being held back. Likewise, the Program C Adaptive Management Tech Memo is virtually complete. Why we don't have that is extremely disappointing. Both the database and this tech memo, we should have had it at the end of last year. So I question why staff hasn't been pursuing these high priority items. I mean, the Program C Adaptive Management Tech Memo, that's mission critical. The yield we get out of the third Program C well is going to allow us to reduce the base and yield metric to under 80. It's critical. That's number one. And we're not really focusing on it. It doesn't appear to be. I'd ask that the BMC drive a stake in the heart of any more discussion about the JPA formation. This is a non-starter. It's not a good fit for Los Osos. Let's drop it. Take it off the list.
All right, Jeff, your time's up.
Lastly, I'll just say the schools, hooking up the schools, irrespective of whether we not got ARPA money, don't do it. It's bad.
Your time is up, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, Toby, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon. This is Toby Moore. I'm the Water Resources Manager and Chief Hydrogeologist at Golden State Water Company. Just wanted to make a follow-up comment regarding the Farrell monitoring well. As Mark Zimmer mentioned, the final well completion report does appear to be written as a new well. The driller did not select the modify or repair well option when they prepared that. I would recommend that the BMC request from Cleith Harris geologist a final as-built of the monitoring well for our records that shows the original construction with the addition of the new construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional comments, Laura?
There is. Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Patrick McGibney. I'll start by reading quotes taken directly from the director's report, which seem to be cut and paste from previous reports. Each quote speaks to, we either can't do something or we haven't done something. Quote, the Los Osos Basin is currently prioritized as a very low priority and thus did not appear to be eligible for round 2 of Sigma implementation grant funding, end of quote. Quote, seawater intrusion mitigation projects under Program C are eligible for low interest loans, but are not currently eligible for grants under Proposition 1, Groundwater Grant Program. Therefore, we will need to look for further funding rounds and other opportunities, end of quote. Quote, unfortunately, this is the third and last round for this program, and they are only looking to fund implementation projects, not planning projects, end of quote. Quote, the BMC did not submit any projects that were sufficiently far enough along to be competitive for this grant opportunity, end of quote. Quote, grant funding may be available through Prop 1 Stormwater Grant Program. However, the application period for round 2 of funding has closed, end of quote. Sustainable yield, quote, no significant hydrological investigations have been conducted to develop the sustainable yield estimate, end of quote. Basin metric evolution, quote, analysis of potential modifications to the basin metrics is currently on hold, end of quote. Funding options, quote, at the October 19th, 2022 meeting, the BMC provided direction for the executive director to work with the BMC party staff to further discuss different options for a JPA with or without a special tax and strategies to educate the community about the proposed tax and the benefits being additional information and bring additional information back to the BMC at a future meeting, end of quote. The point of all of this, again, is after 7 years of management, the BMC has accomplished little in stopping seawater intrusion into our basin. Being an adjudicated basin, we don't qualify for one reason or another for many of the state grants, and we haven't figured out a fair and equitable way to fund projects we need. The basin needs to be under SGMA jurisdiction. Some directors fear losing control under SGMA, but you haven't demonstrated you have control. You haven't yet done what the basin plan required, and that is to take immediate, bold, and decisive action to stop seawater intrusion. Who manages our basin isn't much of a concern to the community. Having a sustainable water basin is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Is there anybody else, Laura?
No, there's no further public comment online.
Okay, with that, then we'll close public comment on the executive director's report. So we'll move on to the action items. We have action item 9A, which is appointment of BMC officers for calendar year 2023. So the staff report is out. One thing that I would like to point out is that this is a little awkward situation for the LOCSD, but I will not be serving on the committee any longer. I will be replaced, but I couldn't be until I was no longer the chair, which I've been for 7 years. So what I'm going to suggest is that we go ahead and elect the chairperson and then defer the other 3 offices until my replacement is in the room, because you really don't know who's going to be available from the BMC to serve on the committee until our next board meeting where that person will be appointed. So unless anybody has objections to that, that's the way I'd like to proceed.
I'm sorry to lose you from the BMC, Marshall. I seek no higher office than treasurer of the BMC, and would be happy to continue in that role. Leaving, I think it's been traditional. Well, in fact, you have chaired this from the get-go. But I think the major water purveyors rightfully hold the chair of this, and so if Director Zimmer is amenable to taking the chair, and I don't know what Director Reineke's desires are, but I think we could fill the chair and the treasurers at the least, and perhaps the secretary position as well.
Well, yeah. What do you want to do, Mark?
That sounds good to me.
So we go ahead and fill the chair and the treasurer, and then the other 2 offices would be deferred until.
And again, I spoke under assumption, and Beth would be happy to certainly encourage your commentary on this. My thinking of the 2 major water purveyors taking the chair and the vice chairs, they have the most extensive staff to back things up. But the entirety of that's a discussion for the whole BMC. But if Beth would certainly be interested in Beth's thoughts on this.
Well, then maybe we should go back just to what I discussed, which is to appoint Mark as the chair and defer the other 3 until after my replacement's been appointed by the LOCSD. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, either way, I don't know if Beth wants to comment. Maybe she does.
No, I agree. I think that that's a good approach.
Which, the first one or
Oh,
the second one?
sorry. Yeah, I think giving the chair to you, Mark, and then deciding the other three later on, I think that makes the most sense right now, given that we don't know necessarily who will represent the CSD.
Okay, yeah, I think that will work. If it's okay with you.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And so this will take effect at next meeting, right? I mean,
You'll be chair next meeting.
Okay.
Unless you want the chair now.
no, we keep it for the rest of the meeting.
So I'll finish up. So is there any public comment in the room on this item? Okay, seeing none, is there any public comment online?
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. There's no public comment online.
Okay, so with that, then we'll just agree on a consensus that Mark will be the chair or the chairperson, and the other three offices will be decided at the next meeting.
For the record, I'll make that a motion.
Okay, Bruce is making an emotion.
I don't think I can.
You
Can I?
can, sure.
Sure.
Grab
Okay,
power,
I'll
grab
second.
power.
I'll second the motion.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Okay, so with that, then we'll move on to item 9B, which is the draft fall 2022 Los Osos Basin Lower Aquifer Water Quality Monitoring Results and updated chloride metrics. So Daniel.
Thank you, Chair Hilsky. Yeah, pleased to provide a little bit of a kind of a preview of what we're going to see in the 2022 annual report. So these are the results of our fall monitoring of the lower aquifer, both aggregated into the chloride metric, as what you're showing on your screen, or you're seeing on your screen, as well as, you know, the raw data provided as an attachment to the agenda packet. Just to point out that this isn't an update of the water level metric. That is only a spring metric. And so we're really here at this point just kind of focused on the change in the chloride metric. And so, you know, just to cut to the chase, what we're seeing with respect to the chloride metric is a reduction of the chloride metric from what we saw a year ago. You know, the graph shows a slight increase in the metric. That's because the lower value was from the spring of 2022. So we're comparing same time of year, we're seeing a reduction in the chloride metric from 2021 to 2022. We're largely attributing that reduction in the chloride metric to a reduction in the chloride concentrations at the Rosina well. They were 289 milligrams per liter in fall of 2021, and they're 235 milligrams per liter in fall of 2022. And so, you know, I think it's sort of continuing, you know, what we've characterized as, or I've characterized, I should say, is somewhat of a bit of an oscillation in the chloride metric. You know, it's up from the spring values, but it's down from the previous year's fall values. You know, and then hopefully a positive sign that, you know, we've halted seawater intrusion from further encroaching in on the basin based on the water quality from these wells and their aggregation in the metric. Another positive sign that we saw in the data was that let me just find it here. Well, have it here. That LA 11 on Pasadena Avenue is a well that we've seen an increasing trend in chlorides over the past number of years, and with the measurements from fall of 2022, we actually saw a decrease from the previous measurement that we had in April. So hopefully a positive sign that potential seawater intrusion occurring at LA 11 and that northwest portion of the basin may be slowing or halting as well. And so that really concludes my presentation of these metrics. Again, we'll have more narrative and, kind of finalization of these metric results in the 2022 annual report, which, will be forthcoming. Drafts of that will be forthcoming as we move further into spring and early summer 2023. And then also, based on comments earlier, looking forward to seeing how these metrics progress with the spring 2023 monitoring, given the significant above average rainfall that we've seen in Los Osos and elsewhere throughout California, as well as the increased, the development and sustaining of what I would consider, relatively significant, at least for recent times, of base flow within Los Osos Creek. I don't know if you've had a chance to observe, but we've had continuous flow in Los Osos Creek since, the storms of early January. And so a real opportunity to provide some sustained recharge to our upper and lower aquifer portions of the basin.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that Jeff Edwards mentioned about the bladder dam, which I thought was an interesting thought that could be constructed on Los Osos Creek south of, on Los Osos Creek. But I thought that putting something in of that type, so when we did have those kind of storms, would allow us to retain that water, I think would be an interesting idea to study and pursue in the future.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, not a trivial project, given the permitting and the environmental work that would do, but any attempts to slow stormwater down without putting it out of the banks of its channels and causing serious destruction are certainly worth considering. I think the idea of a bladder dam is worth considering at some point, but I think we've got much more proven projects in terms of affecting the balance of this basin. And if I could just offer one comment and ask a question. We get repeated assertions that seawater intrusion is rampant, that the basin is in overdraft and out of balance, and that those assertions are disproven by these data. I think that's something for any of the public that are listening. The data that we're seeing, even in this draft form, but looking back in the trend, do not support the conclusion that seawater intrusion is progressing. In fact, you look there, and again, I appreciate very much the modeling projections that are included there as the dashed lines. Seawater intrusion as a trend is coming down before it was predicted to peak, which was a known aspect. So I'm pretty sure that these data on this slide that we're looking at aren't going to stop the assertions, but I think any of the public listening needs to understand that. Plus the consistent rise in the water levels in the wells all over the basin, reflected in the water level metric, show again through significant drought increases in the water. If you compare that to what's happening in the Paso Robles groundwater basin, this is dramatically different. This is we can certainly claim success here. The one question I had was that we had discussed a while back, a year or two maybe now, the fact that the chloride metric is overly sensitive, I think, in most of our opinions, to the measurements taken in one well. And I know we did pause it, but I was curious as to whether there was any further consideration or what the timeline of consideration is going to be for seeing if we can find a more stable metric. And it's tough to characterize a three-dimensional problem with a single scalar number, but was just wondering from staff if there were any thoughts on where we go from here.
Yeah, so that's a good question and a good reminder for all of us. So yeah, we had started an initiative at a staff level to look at, hey, potential ways to modify these metrics to, remove the overemphasis of, one well, especially a well that has challenges associated with borehole leakage. And I think put that on hold as described in the executive director's report, primarily because we were seeing some opportunities to more physically improve our monitoring network and program through the well modifications, and then the initiative in 2023 to construct a brand new monitoring well that we would, are proposing to construct in the general vicinity of the Rosina well, and incorporate into the metric and provide what we would consider a better data point for that critical portion of the basin where we have seen some of the most historic extents and is one of the preferential pathways for seawater intrusion, but without all the problems or challenges associated with the Rosina well. And so yeah, it's a good question. How do we want to progress moving that forward? I mean, I think we could either, we're focusing our efforts at a staff level, getting that well in this year, understanding the challenges. We've had some conversations recently with county planning staff. We think we've got some permitting strategies to move that forward and hopefully in an expedited manner. But yeah, when would we might want to consider modifying the metrics to account for that? I guess maybe after that well goes in would be I guess it would. I think it would be a good time.
That would make sense. We talk about the metrics. We also talk about the methodology, and we want to sync the methodology up with that used in the calculation of the safe yield, where the idea was we're going to halt. We're going to manage the basin to halt seawater intrusion, and that's more than just a single number, right? We've got in plan view, you see, we have interpolated amongst a relatively few number of data points, a contour, and is that then to be, instead of a single scalar number, are we going to use that contour? That's another question. But you referenced one small decrease in chloride, probably a non-change given the error, that the uncertainty in that measurement. But I think it's worth our continued consideration as to how we do this. I think another interesting aspect is we get the transient electromagnetic surveys, the AEM survey that you joined first. You're going to get a much more spatially resolved view of depth to water, potentially. I'm not an expert in that aspect of geophysics, but given the difference in conductivity between seawater and freshwater, maybe we can refine our and we can ground truth what we see on those AEMs with the well samples that are taken here. So I think we're on the verge of it, but this chloride metric's been cause for considerable controversy and confusion, and so it just would be my thought that we do everything we can to keep pushing forward on getting information that we can more usefully base our management decisions on. Thank you.
Yeah, those are good comments, because that was one of the reasons why I was asking about our new well, the redesigned well, and what is the timing of that and how does that come into play? One of the things I would caution about taking Rosina off is just, how does that impact our history, right? We don't want to change our history, and because we don't like it. I think it needs to probably in some capacity always be there, but we have made significant strides in understanding Rosina well, how it's constructed, how it's operated, and how we the timing of sampling and things like that to get a true representation of the seawater right at that point. So I think we made big strides in that well. I was thinking the same thing, like, do we actually take that out of our monitoring plan? I don't know if unless there's good science evidence to do that, we should probably leave it in at some point. I mean, throughout history. So, but maybe there's an opportunity at some point to take it out.
Thank you, Mark. Any other comments? Okay, we'll go to public comment. Anybody in the room would like to? Yes, Miss McFarland, you can step up to the podium. Please state your name for the record.
Becky McFarland. I guess I'd like some clarification on the chloride metric. We're talking seawater intrusion. Last year's metric table shows the chlorides, and we're not talking about where it's at, but it's saying 202 milligrams per liter, and the goal is 100 milligrams per liter. So if it's still, I mean, if it's come down some, that's double what it should be. Am I reading, you can tell me if I'm reading that wrong, but that's double. I mean, 202 is more than double. And on the nitrates, it's supposed to be at 10 milligrams per liter or lower, but it was at 17 milligrams per liter. And that's closer to double than not. So I'm not sure if I heard Supervisor Gibson correctly saying that we're not an overdrafted basin. I may not have heard that. It kind of flew by pretty quickly. So who's making that decision that it's not overdrafted when the state maps show that we're critically overdrafted? Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Nobody else in the room. Okay, Laura, we'll go to the online comments.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand.
Patrick.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. And I'd like to just support Becky's comment right there also. I totally disagree with Supervisor Gibson's assessment of everything. And I'm not really sure what data that he's referring to, because every bit of data that has been presented to the public shows that we do have chloride levels increasing, not decreasing. The county has given us a level 3 severity of our water basin, meaning that we're in overdraft. The Coastal Commission has said we're in extreme overdraft. DWR has stated that also. So I'm not really sure what he's referring to. And I understand that the county wants to make our basin look good right now so we can start or continue permitting water intensive projects in our area. I understand we have a home that is going to be coming to review on the land use committee that is a 12,000 square foot home that is being processed by the county. So I would like to have more data that Mr. Gibson is referring to that would show that our chloride levels are dropping and that we are not in severe overdraft in our basin. Thank you.
There's no further public comment on, sorry, there's no further public comment online.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, with that, I'll bring it back to the committee.
So if I might, Mr. Chairman, let me respond to that. The data that I referenced are the ones that are on the screen right now, which are our chloride metric and our well level metric, which are the summaries of the various observations that we've made over the basin. It is correct that the Department of Water Resources has listed that this as a basin in critical conditions of overdraft. It is correct that the county has identified this as a level of severity 3 basin in terms of it being at or beyond its ability to sustain. What I was saying is that the data that are on the screen here do not conform with those two designations. The fact that easily since 2010, through conservation and later the application of the wastewater recycled water, we are seeing overall standing levels of water in wells rise through a really significant drought is not consistent with a basin being overdrafted. It is also well, it is simply not consistent with that. If you look at the chloride metric, as erratic as it is, the overall trend is within the envelope of prediction, which is the way in which we do management, right? We have a physical model of the basin. We know where water's being extracted. We know where recycled water's being added to the basin. We can calculate what that chloride metric looks like. And again, we can decide whether we think that this is the most stable and useful chloride metric. But the fact that it is under the envelope of the prediction in trend, if not in individual data point, headed downward, is a really good sign. I would note that I'm exploring with county staff what it would take for DWR to rescind the critically overdrafted designation, because again, the data don't support it. That designation was put on by an analysis that precedes a lot of the management efforts that this basin management committee has undertaken. We were also listed as a high priority basin until we were identified as adjudicated. So there's a mismatch here of having a low priority basin that's subject to critical overdraft, again, that the data don't support. And similarly, I think it's a perfectly reasonable issue for the county to reconsider the level of severity 3, because again, the information that we actually collect here don't support this. Was that designation was done on an analysis of the conditions before the Basin Management Committee started its efforts. So that LOS3 designation by the county, it has been part of the conversation with the Coastal Commission. I don't know exactly when we are going to, be in front of the commission considering the community plan and the question of how exactly the water supply interacts with issues like ADUs. But I can tell you again, my comments were specifically that the data that you're looking at on this slide do not support a conclusion for critical overdraft.
Thank you. Okay. Would somebody like to respond to Becky's question about the 200 versus 100?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can respond to that. So yeah, the 200 milligrams per liter is, the current concentration of the chloride metric. And the goal of the chloride metric is, and it's not on this, but I think it's 100. Yeah, 100 or less. And so, that is where we are hoping to head. And I think the dashed line on this figure kind of shows our best technical estimate of when we might get there. So, we've got a ways to go, but we weren't anticipating to be there at this point, based on our previous analysis. So the fact that we're heading that direction is a positive sign, and we hope that we continue to head that direction and reach that goal that was established as part of the basin plan.
Okay, thank you for that, Daniel. Okay, do we have any further discussion or comments?
Yeah, let me just make one that slipped my mind as I was given that. The other piece of information that suggests that we cannot support a determination this basin is critical overdraft is our basin yield metric. That's the most obvious one, where we are calculating basin yield based on the physical model of this basin and the extractions made, and we're just over extracting just over 80% of what we calculate. Now that's again that's a metric, not a measurement. Like it's based on some measurements. It's also based on our best physical understanding of the basin. But again, looking at the entirety of our analysis is the base upon which I make my comments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would add, I think overdraft is a term that gets used a lot, and sometimes it's helpful to try to have a consistent understanding. And so DWR defines overdraft as overdraft occurs where the average annual amount of groundwater extracted exceeds the long-term average annual supply of water to the basin. So, I think the BMC with, in its efforts to estimate whether or not the basin is overdraft really is the basin yield metric and the development of the sustainable yield estimate, which, as we've talked about, you know, the current production of 2,000 acre feet per year is below the current estimate of sustainable yield of 2,380 acre feet per year. So, you know, by that definition, it could be argued it's not an overdraft. Pumping is less than. Now, the BMC also acknowledged in the development of the base plan that there's a level of uncertainty and a desire to improve conditions in the form of pushing seawater intrusion back to historic extents, and thus establish the target for the basin yield metric of 80. And so, well, you know, and which is something we're still striving to achieve through all the different management initiatives that we've described.
Okay, thank you. So with that, then we'll move to agenda item 10, which is adjournment. For my last time, I will adjourn a meeting.
Do it.
Pass the gavel on to Mark.
Excellent.